quite a few years ago, I was working as a wildlife biologist down in South Texas on a lot of different ranches and doing helicopter surveys and setting up management programs and making recommendations as to the number of bucks and does that need to be harvested every year, plus a whole lot of other types of things having to do with cattle and range and the habitat itself. But this one particular ranch up the Mines Road there, which is the road that runs from Laredo to Eagle Pass on the Texas side of the Rio Grande. Big ranch, and been working with it for a while, and as it worked out, it was leased by a group of people out of the Austin area for hunting rights, that is. Found a really nice buck on the very north end of the property, about 12 miles from where the headquarters was. This buck was probably about a 2-year-old at the time, maybe 3, and he was 24, 26 inches outside, long tines, just one heck of a buck. But I could tell he was young, and I saw him the following year, and he was probably about a 27-inch outside buck and 10 points, and kind of got to the point to where I wouldn't tell anybody where I saw these big bucks. Wouldn't even tell them about the big buck. That was my deal. I just wouldn't tell people where to hunt or give them an idea once we did the helicopter survey. Finally, when this deer was about 7 years old, he was every bit of 30, 32 inches outside, main beam, long main beams, long tines, absolutely a true monster of a buck. And when I got to be about 7 years old, I decided, you know what, maybe I really ought to tell these folks about this deer and hopefully they'll be able to harvest them rather than something happening to them. So every year I took a lot of photographs, and I showed the photographs to several of the guys at the beginning of the hunting season and told them about where I've seen this deer, a little creek bottom way up on the far north side of the property. And so they all went up there and hunted this deer. They get up real early in the morning and spend their time way back up on the north side of the property. And hunting season rolls on, and I get calls from these guys. I said, Larry, you're telling us a story. There's that buck does not exist. He's not on our property. We've hunted hard. We cannot find him. And so it rocked on, and I thought, well, at least I tried. So about the tail end of the hunting season comes, and they still haven't taken this deer, and now they're about to call me a liar. And so I thought, well, we've got this meeting coming up after the season's over with, because I always aged all the jaws and made recommendations based on what we saw. And I got there a little bit early, and there was behind this big lodge, a really fancy lodge, lived Juan and Juanita. And they were kind of the caretakers of the house and some of the property there as well. So I was going to have coffee with them. So I went in and I grabbed this photograph and I showed it to Juan. And I said, Juan, have you seen this deer? And back then my hair was real red, and he called me Colorado. He said, sí, señor Colorado. He says, I see him every day. I said, what? You see this deer every day? He says, sí, Colorado. He comes to he eats with my horses. He had 4 or 5 horses there in a little trap, a little pen back behind their little home. And Juan started telling me, he said, every year for the last 5 or 6 years, this buck shows up in his backyard, shows up about October, stays there until about the end of February, and then he's gone again. And when he saw the picture of the deer, there was no question what deer it was. And I said, oh my gosh, Juan, I said, that deer is huge. I said, Juan, why did you not tell these people? I said, these hunters would have paid you a huge tip had you told them where this deer was. And he kind of looked at me and he goes, Señor Colorado, no, it's mi compadre, no. And then he told me how this deer would literally eat out of his hand. He'd feed him corn during that whole time frame, feed a little corn to the horses, and then hold out his hand and he'd feed corn to that particular buck. Unfortunately, that was last year we saw that deer. I suspect there was a mountain lion working in there, kind of where that deer would spend the rest of his time, and I suspect he was probably taken by that lion. But it always tickled me that how this deer moved from the far end of this property to the very lower end, right behind the house where the caretaker was, right next to the lodge. And these people drove by there on their hunts going to the north part of the country, wherever they went on the property, drove right by this deer and never saw him. And two, how it happened to be Juan's mi compadre. No. And he's about to tell anybody where his compadre lived. Such are the stories that you hear quite frequently and you live when you spend time in South Texas, as I have for so many years. And I look forward to joining me right back here next week, or maybe next few days, who knows, where these are not necessarily weekly stories. These are sometimes just periodic stories and sometimes pretty regular stories. So join me right here on LW's Whitetails.